Want another stress?
Oh, Lord.
I'm just glad this is during the workday.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Your work days. Dude, you didn't have handouts for everybody?
I think I'm going to go ahead and call this work session on public safety to order. And Judy, if you could call the roll, please.
Yes, Housh,
I'm here.
McQueen, here, Brown, here, DeVore Leonard,
Here.
also present, village manager Jose Summeron, the police page Burge, Amy Blankenship, our solicitors, here via Zoom.
Great. And just one announcement. I wanted to make sure that all of council knew that on Monday, we do have a 6 o'clock executive session to talk about our annual evaluations of our 2 main direct reports. So just in case that wasn't out there, I wanted to make sure to highlight that. And otherwise, I want to thank Lacey for getting us together here in rooms A and B. And this has been a venue that we've used in the past. And as it looks like we'll do more work sessions, it's good to get this back online. And secondly, I want to thank Gavin for putting a lot of work into this work session and collaborating with our chief of police, Paige Burge, as well as our village manager, Josue Salmeron, and our clerk, Judy Kittner, to get this together. So I'm actually going to hand it over to you.
Okay. Hey, everybody. So first few minutes here, just checking about goals, run through the agenda, make a couple opening remarks, and then off to the races. From a goals perspective, my hope is that, and I think everybody's hope, we've all talked about this, is just that we're kind of continuing a conversation around sort of public safety philosophy, how we approach policing in the village. So that's really the main goal, is open up discussion, and then to sort of check with council and staff about sort of temperature checks on several of the topics of discussion that have come up at different points, but I'm not sure we've ever sort of done a straw poll on to what degree people think these things are things that need to be addressed. And so these are all listed on the agenda. So just not to be overly simplistic about it, but if there's a majority of council members that think these things are worth looking into, then maybe we figure out how to spend some time looking into them. If there's not, then we don't. So that's what we'll hopefully just be getting a temperature check. I don't think we're going to decide anything today. I don't think we're going to, this is just sort of getting us going. I wanted to just run through the agenda and put some timestamps on the remainder. There's a couple things that have minutes on them, but just to give people a sense of sort of where we'll go and have a sense of how long we can talk in each of the sections. So I'm going to try to talk quickly here. Probably, we spent a couple minutes getting started, but something like 10 minutes. When it gets to this current, then Chief Burge will talk, has 10 minutes here to do some introduction and framing. Then for the current status piece, so what I was hoping was that we could start with about 15 minutes of just sort of open discussion, things that are on people's minds, things that people wanted to bring up. And that's sort of in that initial opinion sharing component. And then in terms of framing of potential action items, discussion of real versus ideal, here's a thought, is that this would kind of merge into these temperature checks. So basically, if you think about each of these items as taking 10 minutes each, Some of them could take longer, some of them might be quick. I think the sort of real versus ideal kind of stuff will be most naturally come up as we talk about each of the items. So like the example that's given here of why bulletproof vests, why weapons? Well, that would seem like it would come up pretty naturally under the fifth star there of the question of reducing use of weapons, bulletproof vests, et cetera. So if folks are okay with it, essentially we would, that would give us a little more time to build in. And if we get into a longer discussion, we have a little bit of space there as we're talking about those pieces. And then that would take us for the large majority of our time would be going through each of these individual pieces. And then the wrap up would be quick. So just know we'll do a round of one thing you learned, one thing you're left wondering. And then in terms of these last couple of pieces around building engagement, obviously trying to figure out how do we talk to other stakeholders, some are here, thank you, and other community members. And then the hardest part of this, I think, will be figuring out what are the next steps. So if we say we want to look into something, well, who looks into it and by when and how do we approach it? So I have a suggestion that I wanted to check to see if folks are comfortable with, which is that we don't do that today, that I would take the lead on following up and then at the next council meeting, present sort of a suggestion of a set of next steps that folks could weigh in on so that we're not like today trying to sort out everything about what happens afterwards. Does that sound generally comfortable to people?
Especially since you volunteered to do it, so yeah.
It'll just be a first pass, just to say, rather than sit here and try to work out all the details. Okay, so that's generally where we're going. Any questions on the agenda or things anybody wants to throw out before a couple other remarks and then getting started? Okay, it's 10 minutes for the introduction, 10 minutes for Chief Burge, then 15 minutes for the open opinion sharing, then 10 minutes each with then sort of a buffer of there's 20 minutes that we can kind of flex wherever we need it. And then 5 minutes for the one thing you learned and 3 minutes just to close up shop. Okay, so that's that. So then on the temperature checks, I'll just say I think I was hoping that I would just give like a 2-sentence overview of the topic. And then that we could talk for a few minutes of like, what do we mean? What might be the general parameters? So that, for instance, something like I mentioned the reducing use of weapons one. Well, we could talk for an hour about just what does that mean? So just to get generally in the right ballpark, and then there will be a point where I'll kind of say, okay, now let's do it. Now let's do that sort of formal check in with council members. I was thinking about Chief and Josue also, if you would feel comfortable also kind of giving your how are you feeling about this on these sections, on each of these? And then literally just kind of going around and go, yeah, I think we ought to keep looking into this, or no, I don't want to keep looking into this. And then we move on to the next thing. So I'll kind of facilitate us talking about the topics a little bit, then doing a little straw poll, and then moving on to the next one. Okay. All right. That's that process. Yeah. So I guess the only other sort of introductory remarks is just saying, I think we're here because some of these topics come up oftentimes with like 5 or 10 minutes at the end of a long meeting, trying to open up space to have a thorough conversation about these things that try to figure out how to match our village priorities, our values, and think about how to approach these issues. Yeah, I think those are the main things. So yeah, I'm hoping this can be constructive and positive and everybody can be respectful of one another. So that's it. I think that's all in terms of introductory remarks before handing off to Chief Burge. Anybody else have any questions or anything before we get started? All righty. Well, Chief Burge, what you thinking about?
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate you guys putting this together. I think Gavin hit the nail on the head. We a lot of times talk about these things in brief little snippets during a very lengthy council meeting. So we don't have enough time to really discuss anything in detail. So hopefully we can do a little bit of that today. So I just wanted to give you guys just probably a lot of stuff you already know here, but just some reminders about our department, who we are. First of all, this photo here, we took this summer. Lacey took that. So I know we already recognized her a little bit, but thank you to Lacey, who's an amazing photographer. This is your team minus our newest officer there, and you'll see, obviously you can see us in uniform, but I think it's important to see us in our norm as well. All right, so our organizational chart, where we stand currently, obviously we have one chief, our administrative corporal, one operations corporal, the support services department, which is consisting of one property room manager and one community outreach specialist. Our administrative corporal, all the way to the left, is responsible for our telecommunications center, among other things. The dispatch or telecommunications center is made up of 8 individuals. And our operations corporal is responsible for our 5 patrol members. Obviously, these are guidelines on village policing. Everyone's very familiar with those, so we don't need to linger too long unless anyone has questions on that. This is a summary of our mission, vision, and values. As a matter of fact, the mission statement and the values have existed for some time, but we really didn't have a vision. A vision is something that I've put together over the course of the work that I've done over it's been a year now. So I suppose a year since interim of last November. So I was trying to think of exactly what summarizes how we achieve the mission, which of course is ensuring a safe and welcoming environment for those who live, work, and visit Yellow Springs. So under our vision statement, you'll see there that we accomplish that by operating within the GVP. We also are adopting a department culture that is consistent with these guidelines as well. I think that's a piece of criteria that's been missing in the past, and I'm glad to say that I think we've made a lot of strides and improvement in that area. Engaging in evidence-based policing that uses data collection and transparency to guide strategies, crime control, and community relations. I'm sure over the last year, you guys have heard me many times refer to some data point somewhere. I'm a firm believer in it. I think it's very hard to argue with data, but of course, this is a very new approach to policing. Evidence-based policing is, so it's also something that I learn something new about every day. But it's important that I think that we drive the decisions that we make, whether it be about how we spend money or how we allocate resources based on evidence. Establishing meaningful community-based initiatives that build trust and legitimacy. Trust and legitimacy are 2 pillars of policing that are the absolute most important when it comes to effective policing in any community. And then last, prioritizing recruitment, recognition, and retention, creating a culturally fluent team members who respond more empathetically, deliver higher quality services, and contribute to overall community wellness. So just some summarizing there for what we stand for and what we're trying to accomplish. These are a few of the department priorities. They tie directly into the mission and the vision of the agency. These are some accomplishments so far, not everything. I didn't want to go on for too long with this portion, but as mentioned in the previous slide, recruitment, retraining, rewarding, and retaining. I highlighted there that those are in line with all 4 of our guidelines on village policing. We've hired an experienced full-time officer to fill one of our vacancies. We were able to recruit and hire a full-time dispatcher to fill the vacancy there, who also had much experience, and bring our staffing levels in dispatch to a minimum. Lastly, our dispatcher for day shift, Andrew Karen, was able to create a formalized field training program for our dispatchers, which was something that was lacking before. Prior to him creating this, essentially dispatchers were just trained by whatever shift it was they were coming in on. And as we know, when that, I'm sure we've all been in that situation where we've come into a workplace and training was a little bit up and down. So by formalizing this, we've got a lot more consistency in the quality of service that we offer. Data collection and transparency. We conducted the first annual police department survey. You guys are in possession of the results of that survey. I think we had a total of 128 responses, if I'm not mistaken. 150 is where you should be for statistical, relevancy. So just shy. I'm hopeful that next year we'll do some critiquing and make that a little bit different and just continue to collect what's our community like seeing, what don't they like seeing, and make improvements as we do. Ohio Collaborative, we've currently been certified in Group 1 and Group 2. By the end of the year, we'll be recertified. That's something you have to do yearly to make sure that you're up to date. Beginning of next year, we should be certified in all 5 groups, including body-worn camera. I won't go into too much detail about that, but the Ohio Collaborative is a governing body that essentially says, hey, you guys have the policies, the procedures, you do the police work based on all the different criteria they put into place. You also have a handout that highlights what that criteria is, saying essentially the state certifies you as being accountable to your community and transparent with your community, just to name a few. been working on an annual report, which when I took over in November of last year, I did not have enough time to complete the 2021 report for 2022. So I decided to go ahead and do a combined report for which would be released at the beginning of 2023. The annual report has everything from what each individual person at our agency does day in and day out, goes into property room statistics, policing statistics, photos, job descriptions, you name it. If there's a bit of information you've wanted about the police department, it's in there. And that you should expect to have that in your hands by beginning of 2023. And then last but not least, we focused on our records management processes. That started just before I came in. We were able to get at least one individual trained on fulfilling records management requests. And to continue doing the work on just general records management, be it following our retention guidelines, purging, organizing, whatever the case. And then our last bullet point, establishing meaningful community-based initiatives. This is in line with our guidelines for locally minded and peaceful. We implemented special assignments. You guys have heard me talk about those many times. Initiated our first school resource officer / youth outreach program at the Educational Service Center. You guys have approved a therapy dog program that we're still currently working on funding opportunities for, and began ramping our efforts up with community education programs such as ALICE, scam presentations, threat assessments, vulnerability assessments, drug takebacks, and then our annual Touch a Truck event. All these events give us an opportunity to engage with the community on a more personal level, and they're really just scratching the surface at the programs that we hope to initiate. And so this is really just my summary right here. I have a lot more information. I've kind of organized it by the agenda here. So as you go through those bullet points, Gavin, and find out what people are interested in talking about, I have information if they want to chat about it. If they don't, we'll move right along. So thanks. Questions?
Could we get this? Could you send us?
I think it was sent out, wasn't it? Didn't I? PowerPoint? No? Okay. All right. I got you. Then yeah, sure.
But I think related to that, I do want mission, vision, values, and the priority slides in the packet for Monday.
I'll get it all to you. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So anyway, so those three, like those main three slides, yeah, I think those are great.
Well, great. Thank you. And you get 2 minutes and 34 seconds back, or like a reclaim my time situation. Thank you. No, that's great. Thank you for providing this, starting us out with that information. So yeah, I guess just wanted to open up, I made a few remarks to get started. I think everybody here has opinions about these things, has ideas they come in with. I thought we could just start by folks sharing. Are there, particular questions that you come with or opinions that you have that you want to share? Things that you think are important for us to be thinking about collectively as we're, embarking on these conversations. I guess I should have said, I feel like this is unquestionably one of many conversations. I don't know how many exact, formal work sessions we'll have, or if we'll end up with a committee, or we'll end up with a staff council team, or I don't know how this will exactly go forward, but I have every assumption this is just the beginning of many conversations over the coming year. So yeah, just any thoughts that folks have that they want to sort of, put out there as we're framing our discussion.
Well, I'll just say what I'm impressed by is, Chief Burge's ability to put together pertinent data and to present it in such a convincing manner. I've said this before. I love Brian Carlson, but he didn't do this. It was just not in his bailiwick, to be able to drill down on data like that, and he acknowledges that himself. But it definitely does, I think, a great deal to inform us of what's going on, in the police department. And beyond that, I'm just happy to play a part in getting you funded for the next year.
Well, I'll take advantage. So I would say that I think that the department as it is currently organized with the people in it is perhaps the best police department that we've had since I've lived in Yellow Springs for 50 years. And everyone knows that Chief McKee was very valued and beloved. And at the same time, at that time, I didn't have a sense that it was a team. That I remember every particular officer, and they each had their own quirks and positive and negative things. And I have a sense now that there's more of a team than there has been. So that's, at the same time, and this is awkward and not easy, I am not convinced that we need as big a department as we have. In the 50 years, the population of Yellow Springs has actually decreased, and the presence of Antioch College has decreased. So that we have a much older population. We do have more tourism, but I think there's some, I do appreciate this data, though I didn't get to see it until I got in the room. It's not clear whether tourism, how much that impacts need for extra policing. So I am very interested in having continued conversations in 2023 regarding looking into this, what the police department is doing, the kind of calls that they're making. Is there someone else that could do them? Does that make sense? Just sort of really drilling down. One thing that was helpful to me when the township, the village and the schools got together was to hear about the calls for the township fire department. And it was sort of an aha moment that I had at that point, because what I realized with the fire department is that it's not primarily fires that the department responds to. It's emergency health services. I will say that, from helping someone get up off the floor to going to a traffic accident, those kind of things. And in the same way, my sense is that our police department is, I'll just say maybe 80% sort of social community service things, not crime, not criminal related. So, but still, I think in our head, we think police, fire, but that's not really what either of them are primarily. And so I think sort of having conversations about what are the needs of the community in terms of, well, say fire and criminal activities, and what are the needs of the community in terms of community health and emergency services, and then how best to respond. And we do have other resources. I mean, we have the city of Dayton that's using the mediation program, mediators to respond directly to complaints that officers would have responded to. So I think that we have resources within Yellow Springs and outside to look at our what are the needs? How are we responding to them? Are there other things that we could or should be doing to be more effective, and also to lower the amount of money we're spending? And the one last thing, the issue of police are the only legitimate governmental entities that can carry weapons. And so it's always important, I think, to be looking at that. And I understand, having talked to Chief Burge about why the emphasis on not using weapons and using other means of encouragement, but I still would like to have that elevated weapons. And do officers always need to have guns? And so, okay. Well, thank you.
You want to talk?
Not yet.
Okay. Yeah, I'll say a few things. So I think first of all, one thing I've appreciated, and I really feel like it's been over the last 5 or 6 years, is, once an intentional effort around the justice system task force, and then beyond that came into play, that the village has listened and responded. And I've seen, and I think the real work started with Chief Carlson, and it's a reason why we chose you, Chief Burge, to continue that work. And so I've been really happy about that progression, just in terms of, I love seeing the guidelines to village policing, referenced. I like that, those philosophies are ingrained in the way we, continuously improve. So I think that's really important. And I think, we've got work that, we are continually doing. I will say that, Mary Ann referenced it, and I mean, it's whether it's an elephant in the room or not, the size of the department, has to be something that we continually think about and justify. And so, I think it's important that we, talk about what is that right configuration of folks. I do think it's important to balance, for example, we saw some stats about, per capita police officers in places like Cedarville, which, again, are no comparison to Yellow Springs at all. And so my understanding is we're not far off per capita from like the state average. And so, we have to factor in what it means to be a destination town and what the needs are. I think where I come from, for the most part, is focusing on what I think our residents overall want. And so this is why, when things like eliminating dispatch and moving that to Xenia, I would take a lot of convincing, because I think that's at the core of what our residents value, is that hands-on, village, Yellow Springs, I guess, relation. And so when I look at, some of the stats that I know we'll, probably go through, and, it's been really important to me to look at the community engagement numbers, because I think that is a significant part of what we do, and a service that's highly valued. So, again, I'm always thinking seriously about, what we need in terms of numbers and makeup of the police team. But overall, I come from a place where I feel that our residents really value what they get. And I appreciated that Mary Ann said, I think we've really moved towards having more of a team orientation, and valuing that community interaction, which wasn't always there when I first came to town. So.
Well, I'll mostly be sort of facilitating with this. I'll make some remarks too, from my own perspective. I think part of the reality is that we have a budget, like we have limitations. I know, like, and that we don't have as, I think most everybody in here knows, I was surprised that we had so little. We had our most recent budget meeting, and we're going through and we're realizing that we're pretty much at a status quo budget. And then there's not really anything left for many other projects or priorities. And so I think this is definitely one of the, the impetus to have these conversations, is that we have a finite amount of resources that we have as a village. We have to figure out which things are we valuing. And so this kind of thing that Mary Ann brings up of like, what is the need that's being met is really fascinating. In the presentation that you made at the for the budget conversation, you talked about how, like, essentially the police department, the dispatch, is like essentially the switchboard for the village, far beyond just taking policing calls. There are all these other things. So, sometimes I think about this as like, it's certainly beyond police. That's why, it's talked about as public safety, public safety philosophy. What are all of the things that we're doing beyond the policing component? So anyway, I just feel like this is part of this, broader conversation about, we only have X amount of resources. What are the best investments of those resources for our village? And the reality is, this is a big hunk of our money. And so it's just, hey, we got to kick the tires. As Brian said, I think, we just have to continue to make the case, continue to, ask ourselves these questions, even if some of them are hard. When I sat down with Chief Burge, I said, these issues, they might all be like third rail issues. This idea of an elephant in the room, they're all sort of tough conversations to have. You'd rather not ever have to make any changes to anything. One thing I want to say is I am very hopeful that if we ever do make any changes, that we can make them in a seriously thoughtful way. I don't, in the same way I said, I don't think we're going to make any decisions today. I would certainly hope that anything that we would do in a phased way. For instance, I'll just throw out the one around merging police and fire departments. That is a big concept that will unquestionably take a long time, if it were ever to even be possible. So at least I think I could probably speak for everybody in that, like, there's no expectation that any of these things are like an overnight thing. And part of the reason we're having this conversation here, as opposed to in the context of the budget, for example, is that I'm not under the impression that there's any sort of push to make significant changes on a dime. It's like anything that would happen, we would be trying to do in a thoughtful, measured way. Other thoughts? I don't know, sort of big picture framing things people are thinking about.
Could we go to the slide after this one?
Sure. Yeah. Are you ready to move on to that part of the agenda there?
That's fine. Sure.
Okay. So the way I structured this presentation was just based on the agenda, assuming that there would be interest in all of the topics that you presented. I wanted to have some information to present to you guys to have on each of those topics. So obviously size of department sounds pretty universal. We want to discuss. And the very first bullet point under size of department was, of course, do we need 2 officers on patrol? So a couple things to highlight the need for 2 officers on patrol. First of all, we schedule single officer coverage half the time, approximately.
So hey, Chief, just real quick. So we'll just, if we're going to roll into doing these, which is totally great.
Yeah.
And we saved a few more minutes on the last agenda item. Maybe you could try to do like a couple minutes and then we'll open it up for discussion. Is that cool? Okay.
Could I ask where we're moving from what to what?
Just down, I think we're just going into the temperature check, starting with the size of department.
Okay, and you said that we're going to do framing potential action items as part of that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. Cool. Go for it.
So we schedule single officer coverage 50% of the time, which means the other 50% of the time we schedule a second officer to be here or overlapping coverage. Now, one of the things I wanted to note about this is out of that scheduled double coverage, so that 50% of the time, we actually only have a second officer on the road 37% of the time. And that comes to about 3,242 hours out of the year. And a whole year is 8,760. The reason I want to point that out is because that double coverage, that officer who is scheduled, is there for a very specific reason. First and foremost, when an officer has to take time off for sick, vacation, personal, training, court, whatever. And some of those things come up very suddenly. I have a second officer on who I say, ring, ring, I need you to move to day shift. I need you to move to night shift from that mid shift, which is that second officer coverage. And then I'll make the second point here. I'll summarize and then I'll just see if there's any questions about that. So I noted in our budget conversation, the shift relief factor. I spent a lot of time talking about that mathematical equation. That establishes the minimum, not what is recommended, not what is standard, the minimum number of full-time staff needed to cover any given shift. So currently running 2 12-hour shifts of 7A to 7P and 7P to 7A. Each shift would require 2.58 officers, and you guys have that handout as well. I can't have 0.58 officers, so that's 3 officers per shift. In an effort to operate with minimum, and instead of having 3 officers assigned to each of those shifts, that's why we have incorporated the mid shift or that overlapping coverage of 2P to 2A. And that's really just the dollars and cents. That's what makes the most sense from a fiscal standpoint. But I have a lot of other information to go into about why it makes sense from a safety standpoint, from a service standpoint. But any questions about that before I go into further points? Yeah.
Actually, I am interested in why it makes sense from the personnel standpoint. I get that part, but I'm ready to go into the next piece.
Okay, absolutely. So first and foremost, and again, I took the opportunity to align these things with our guidelines on village policing. So safety. Over the last, from 2021 to 2022, we've had 58 arrests, and an arrest, although sounds like we've taken someone into custody and taken them to jail, an arrest can be a physical arrest or released on summons. Anytime that happens, that can be a very time-consuming process. There's a lot of paperwork. You are essentially tied to that individual for that entire duration of that arrest. And so when we have someone else on duty who can handle calls for service, can handle medical assists with our fire department, whatever the case may be, that's an important point to highlight. We have 89 different call types, and I've provided you guys a handout with each individual call type that we take here at YSPD. 42 of those call types are handled most effectively with 2 officers, and there's a lot of different reasons why it's most effective. It could be for de-escalation purposes. It could be for safety purposes. It could be for training and qualification purposes. It could be for comfort level. We have several folks in the community who are very familiar with, say, Corporal Raful. And so when he's handling a call for service when another officer's handling, and they might actually say in the midst of a crisis, is Paul here? Is Paul here? And we can say, actually, yes, hang on 1 second. And we're able to call that individual to come respond. 18 additional calls from those 42 are a must. That's a must. We got to have 2 officers there. And that's typically the standard for a safety reason. But it can also be, I'm just going to stick with safety because that's truly the reason. And safety is not just the risk of an officer getting beat up or the risk of a community member, being harmed because that officer had to escalate their level of force. Sometimes it's traffic control. We've got crashes in the middle of Xenia Avenue and I can't move those vehicles, but the officer has to handle the business with both of the parties involved and cars are zooming by. The thing that kills us the most as police officers are vehicle crashes. Second point to make would be obviously it's safer for the community, victim and officer. Officers are able to break away to handle additional overlapping calls. I highlight this again, specific requests for a specific officer or one thing I really like to mention is a lot of females, be them a victim or not, maybe they just want to talk to an officer, request quite regularly to speak to a female officer. So having one available, even outside of my working hours, sometimes even during my working hours, be it me being tied up, those are important things to highlight. So locally minded, having a second officer on allows officers to effectively balance their workloads. I talked a lot about the assessment I did of the agency. And it was called the workload-based assessment. And that was based on our actual workload here in the village. So our core responsibility is handling complaints, calls for service. Complaints often result in administrative and follow-up work, depending on the nature of the call. That follow-up work can be as quick as a 30-minute report. That follow-up work can be weeks, months, or a year's worth of an investigation. And that officer has to have time to commit to that process. So those 2 things will take up each 1/3 of that officer's time. Leaving in mind what Brian mentioned about the community expectation of involvement and engagement and prioritizing us being out and face-to-face with the community that we serve, the additional 1/3 of their time is dedicated to these special assignments that I've given. It's dedicated to the events that we put on. It's dedicated to things like this, where I'm thankful I'm able to have Corporal Raful here for a second perspective. You guys hear from me all the time. So those are some of the reasons it's locally minded. Resolution oriented and safety centered. As a part of our commitment to approaching every situation with non-violent conflict resolution, utilizing the least amount of force necessary. Officers are assessing every situation with the safety of community in mind, and I mean every. I think people really think that we go out to a call, it was a request for officer, and it was a neighbor complaint, and we're just like, well, this really isn't a criminal thing. So while we're out there, we're assessing constantly because things can escalate very quickly. 2 neighbors feuding over a non-criminal matter can turn criminal very quickly if they've been at each other's throats for 2 years. And I haven't had time to collect the information and de-escalate. Now we've escalated to an assault. I included in your handouts what's called the action response continuum. And what that highlights is how officers are trained to respond to force, to respond to a situation where someone's initially yelling or someone's balling up their fists, or maybe now they're coming towards me. Now, oh my gosh, they've pulled a weapon out. Or these are the things that can happen on a call for service that might escalate our response to that action that person is. And the things that are taken into consideration for us before we use any level of force are age, sex, size, skill level, all very important, relative strength, but most notably is the subject to officer ratio. I was speaking with Gavin one-on-one when we had this conversation. I gave the example of Gavin's a taller gentleman. I'm not going to presume your weight, especially not in a public setting. But if Gavin and I were engaged and he wanted to fight with me and I'm alone, I'm most likely not going to fight Gavin. I would escalate to the use of a tool. If I had Officer Raful with me, we would be more than willing to create time and distance to have more conversation to see if, and we can assess better. He can keep the community safe while I engage with Gavin, vice versa, to make sure, and all that is relevant to using the least amount of force necessary. So before I move on, and I just covered a lot there, is there?
Well, I guess I'll just ask, just make sure the way I sort of summarize it, and it's in part from the conversation we have, on some level, the number of officers that are available is, I don't, this might be an oversimplification, but essentially a quality and a safety question, right? Meaning you could have, so we talked about, we could have no police officers and then something happens and then we have to call the county and it takes 15 minutes for them to get here. And then whatever happens during that time, right? So we could do that. We could have no police whatsoever. But then we have a quality question of, is that something we're okay with? And this is similar. I see Johnny back here. This is in relationship to the same quality and safety questions that we have around other services that we provide at the village, right? So we could have no one available to turn our electricity back on. It would be cheaper, but it would be really upsetting to people. So we're trying to find the balance of quality, safety, and cost. Is that fair?
Correct.
Okay, so I think just to say we could, and this is the kind of thing where like part of me is like, one of the next steps might be, let's do a full presentation on this question. You know, like here, we're just kind of checking in to see, is this something that we want to dig into more deeply and to get some feedback on what kinds of things are people wondering? And then we can try to figure out, okay, how do we approach this question? Because this kind of information is really helpful. I know it's the first time I've seen some of this. I'm assuming it's the same for other people. So really helpful. So this is the 10-minute mark, just as a pause to note, that's how long it takes. So you can see, we could talk about this for, we could talk about this for an hour all by itself. So I think we could do, as if it's okay, is try to do the sort of top lines of other thoughts on size of the department. And then I want to open up to council members to kind of get a sense of, how are you feeling about this? What kind of things are you wondering about besides what the chief has talked about?
Sure. So I'll just be very brief then here. Reliance on mutual aid comes up a lot. These are a couple talking points I like to mention. Our training, we know how we're trained. We don't know how Reliance or mutual aid will be trained. Everyone's dealing with staffing issues. Response times are significantly impacted by such. I gave an example to Marianne when we were one-on-one, where I had to wait 13 minutes for backup to come in a very volatile situation. An individual was armed, actively engaging in damaging behaviors, and 13 minutes is forever. And then last, just some general statistics, and thank you to Corporal Poole, was able to find these. Brian, I think you mentioned it about the standard for Ohio. They have an average of 395 police officers per 100,000. We are below the average with 8 police officers. Based on the Ohio average, we should have 14 police officers. Even based on the lowest national average, which is Oregon, for 284 officers per 100, we should have just over 10 police officers. And they don't take into account, obviously, our busy summer season. These are statistics based on every agency in the entire nation. So I think that's my last talking point for size of department. So I'll open it up.
So I did, what do we know about what kind of data has been collected regarding when the highest amount of calls are? So in my layperson's mind, I'm thinking Friday through Sunday. And also when we have like events where people come into town. That's the first thing. Another thing, this might be skipping ahead a little bit, is with speaking to community members, they've noticed that there is not as much coverage on the straightaways. Xenia Avenue from West Center College to Hyde Road. I live over in the Fair Acres neighborhood, so Fair Acres to all the way to, what is that, East Enon. There was a sign, 25 miles per hour. People don't do that. So I guess like I said, the first question is the data. What do we have about the incidences of calls? When do they happen the most? And then the officer presence on the road. And then also, I think that it's important that we kind of remind people in a public forum that every time there is a call that comes into the police station, no matter what it's for, an officer has to respond.
That's not necessarily true, but we do try to.
You do try.
Right. We do try to. Now,
so welfare checks, loud neighbors,
yep,
noise complaints. And so I think it's important because I don't think that people realize that you have to respond as much as you are required to.
Right. No, that's a very good point. So I'll hit your first
So-
question.
Real quick, sorry, if it's okay. So there, I'm making a list of like other topics, ideas and follow-up stuff.
Okay, okay.
So on the one about like, do we know the highest volume of calls? Is that something that you could put on? So we don't need to talk about every one,
Sure.
but we can make a list of stuff and then figure out a timeline to follow up and send stuff to people.
Yep.
Is that okay?
I
I'm
already
just
have that
trying to
data.
keep us all here till 5. It's a good
Oh,
question.
yeah, great.
And then the second piece, if you want to respond to that, go for it.
Sure. So the officer coverage on the road, outstanding that you brought that up. So obviously they're seeing that because we have scaled back our coverage. Before we lost the bodies that we did, we ran 10-hour shifts, 4 hours a day. There was a lot more overlapping coverage. So we've scaled back again. I highlighted minimum staffing levels. So that overlapping coverage, you see a lot less. So officers are primarily, their duties are responding to calls for service. So you're not seeing a lot of proactivity. That was a big reason why I did the community survey as well. We saw some response. People wanted a little bit more traffic enforcement. So you should be seeing a lot more of that. You are seeing a lot more of that. I know it's been happening. So, but yes, that's exactly why it's notable. Officers are tied up. They're dealing with calls for service. If they're not dealing with a call for service, I've got them working on specific administrative functions to assist with the day-to-day operations of the PD, as well as community relations activities to be more involved with the engagement piece. So.
I would submit in reference to the first question Carmen raised, in addition to the time of day, day of the week, is also the time of the year. I imagine that fluctuates with regard to
Significantly.
visitors coming to town. So,
And I can pull both reports. It's just me running it like that. So.
A couple things. One, it's always more helpful to have all of this stuff at least a day ahead of time. And ever since we've been doing the budget stuff, it seems like things have been, or sometimes it's for council meetings as well. We get something in the afternoon of council meeting. So like when I got this report on my laptop, I could only look at it this way, but I couldn't even see the whole thing. So to be able to really have time to think about what you've done, which I certainly appreciate, and this, I think it's important to get it at least a day ahead of time, if not more. So that's just a general response for staff that if we don't really have time to read something, at least for myself, I can sit here and go, yeah. And it's just not, it's not the best. The other thing, I've heard it said, well, what are the officers doing? There are 2 police cars sitting out there. Frequently, at least one of them, it has the motor running, and I hear people, oh, they're in there having dinner and fixing dinner and everything. So there's some perception that, you're just hanging out in the police station, just doing whatever. And that's one thing I think that contributes to a sense that some in the community have, is like, we really don't need these many officers. So I'm not necessarily asking for an answer to that right now, but I think having a sense of a day in the life of the Yellow Springs Police Department, why are the 2 cars sitting down there? How are you spending your time, Chief Burge? Because I can also imagine that the amount of paperwork and bureaucracy just increases every year. So just getting a deeper understanding of not just this paper thing, but what's going on within the department would be helpful.
Sure.
Something just to pick up on that point about what the public perception is regarding the number of officers. I look at Chief Burge as the subject matter expert in these things, and the value of data-based decision making is real. I mean, I don't think anybody would say, "Oh, that's not the way to do work." I think it is, and I think I'm in a position to rebut what a average citizen would say. We don't need this many, and I said, "Oh, well, we do need that many, and we could use more." So, I'm not looking personally for a problem to solve here. Because I think the work has been done either through attrition or other circumstances where the numbers are what they are. Again, and I think the conversation is important, so that we are informed, but on the surface, just using that example, having that, whatever the number of officers are that people think we have, yeah, it sounds big, whatever the number is for a village as small as we are, 30 minutes ago, I felt that way, but I don't feel that way now because of data that's been presented. So again, I'm just saying that should be our starting point, is where the facts take us, not wherever the supposition or the anecdotal information has led us to be. The facts are, all this is solid, and I'm just challenged to try to find something to pull out of there that doesn't look right, because I don't see anything.
Yeah, and if I can just build on that, I'll just say that, I think the way I look at this is like, we're trying to assess the need. So we could also, I feel like when you presented your budget information, it was a compelling argument that we need more. That there's arguments, that's the purpose of this, is to look at this stuff from all angles and to think about it in the context of all of our needs across the village and to figure out what the right balance is. That's my hope, at least. I'm going to ask if we could sort of pause here, because we're getting to kind of 20 minutes on this topic. And arguably this is like one of the biggest ones and the most complex ones. So it's okay if we need a few more minutes, but are there any kind of burning questions or comments that folks have before we kind of get a straw poll on like, if we should spend some more time looking into this?
Well, I'll just say, when you touched on the possibility of combining police and fire, I'm just wondering, is that feasible? What do you get out of that?
We're going to a lot of information to give today. So if we get to it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's
You're saying they're interrelated. I got you. Yeah. Cool.
Can I just make a quick comment about the information provided? First of all, Paige just gave things of her own volition. There was no request made that she provide anything to anybody. So that was just that's extra. So I just put it out as soon as I got it, because great that you get it. Great that you got it. And the other is, if you'll recall, everybody is strongly encouraged to go on ride-alongs. That is something you're really encouraged to do when you come in as a council member, and that's a standing offer. And I would maybe reiterate that if you really want to, the day in the life stuff, that's a good way to get it.
Cool.
All right.
Okay.
Actually, I just might say one other thing. So I think it's embodied in some of these temperature checks. But I think it's also important. You made me think about this, Kevin, to, not only think about the status quo, but in terms of this balancing act that Gavin's referred to. There are opportunities to think about transformation in ways that, address needs and whatnot. So I guess I just, I think as we talk about these things, we should keep in mind that, there's what makes sense with status quo, but there's also potentially opportunities to shift, just our thinking and what things look like. So, which I think we're getting at with things like the social worker role and that sort of thing, but I don't want to lose that thought. But again, we're not going to figure that out tonight. So
somewhere in here, instead of a question, I guess, is raised, instead of having two police officers, what does it look like to have an officer and a social worker? Chief Burge and Officer Fool, like in your experience, how often at 10 o'clock at night or, any off hour time are you finding that, wow, we've been nice to have Florence?
Well, first of all, Florence will come anytime we call, and she does.
Yep.
So I commend her for that, especially being the only one on. But, I do want to, present the idea or the concept that if we had more of Florence, how that would be utilized, because that conversation or that topic point was on this. And I'll give Florence the floor in a minute, because this is her expertise. But I do want to at least make one point here. So I mentioned in a previous slide that we take 89 different types of calls for service. of the calls that we receive, only 7 of which could a social worker handle. And if you're looking at the printout that I've provided you, that's highlighted in there.
Mhm.
And of those 7 call types, 5 of those would still require the presence of an officer. And I'm going to cede to Florence and let her speak to this, because I think from an officer's perspective, you might think, well, of course you're going to say that job security, right? But I want you to hear from Florence and her experience with actually going out and handling calls, and then seeing how sometimes it's still best to have an officer there. So Florence, if you just wouldn't mind to speak a little bit to what it would be like if you tried to have social workers handle calls.
Yeah, so I have been out on calls with the officers of all types. Whenever there's a request, then we figure out, the dispatcher determines what the call is or what needs to be done. So if there's an officer going out and they might need a help of, I don't know, background or confrontation, or if it's a child and a parent, or if it's the call type determines whether I go or not, is what I'm trying to say. So out of those different call types, and when I'm on the scene, if there is a disturbance or if there's a child involved, I can deal with that while the officer is dealing with whatever the criminal aspect of it is. If there are resources needed, then I can deal with that while he's getting the information, he or she. In the case, I think the very first call I ever went out on was a fire. That was years ago, and people and community. And so there needed to be water, and people stay back, and who is this report? I mean, there's just all sorts of things. If there's a death, then the officer has to stay with the body. And then there has to be someone maybe to help the people who are distraught. They might have questions. They might need phone calls to be made. There might be everyday things to handle that I can do while the officer is there with the body, or doing whatever needs to be called, phone calls to be made, family to locate, or if there is, what are the type of calls?
Well, let me ask you this, Flo, not to interrupt your chain of thought, but of all of your experience that you've had, is there anything that you would say you would feel comfortable with going out and handling just by yourself?
Just a couple, like call for service, or we have some welfare checks that we do. We know the person, we know the situation. So I could go out and make the initial check, but if there's no answer, I'm not going to go in. The officer would have to go in on the welfare checks.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a person who hasn't, a family member calls from out of town and said, I haven't talked to my dad and so, and he did this and that, thus and so, where could you just check for me? You know, I can make that check. I could even do a phone call rather than go out, but yes, things like that. But I would feel secure with an officer with me, because if there is some trauma or some type of incident, then they need to be there, or if there's criminal action or whatever. So I prefer to ride with an officer when I go out on a call.
And I guess for me, this again goes back to the sort of quality and safety question, because for instance, in Dayton right now, there are social workers that are responding to calls solo, period, consistently. I think what you're saying is not that that's not ever, that it's impossible, but that it might be less safe, and that the quality may be less, there might be less quality as a result. Is that fair?
And that's a call for a social worker. So when I'm a social worker, when there's a social worker got on a social work call, they have made steps ahead of time to assure that they're going where they know the situation.
Yes.
They've called the person, they've set up the appointment, there's paperwork to be signed. There is a specific reason why a social worker is going to that location.
Right.
Right. So that's not a call that came into dispatch for, I haven't heard from my uncle in 3 days, or there's a guy out here who's screaming at the top of his lungs and smacking his head against the shelter, but he's not talking to
Oh, sure. I understand. But
Yeah.
you're saying that, just so there are a lot of calls that come in that are not those kind of calls, that are not, I've been slamming my head against a wall. There are lots of other calls. And part of the process that you go through is sorting who handles what calls in what way, right?
actually would disagree. I guess I don't understand what you mean by there's lots of other calls.
Well, you're saying that there, I mean, what was it, 30,000 calls last year?
Oh, 59,000 calls into the department and sent out of the department. Not
Yeah.
all of those were for a request for an officer.
Yeah,
Or
I guess
request
all I'm
for
saying
anything.
is that this idea that, I'm just using Dayton because it's a big city right around the corner.
Sure.
Is going through a process to figure out how to make it so that more calls are being handled, more issues are being handled by social workers. And I'm saying it's not conceivable that we could do that here?
No, I think what I'm saying is the data that I'm talking about, the calls that we're talking about, I'm giving you the information based on what officers deal with, because I don't know social work. Like what she's giving you examples of are, if someone's called and they have a need for a social worker, we can set them up an appointment with Florence, which is what we do now. And if we had more of Florence, then we could continue to do that good work and get resources to people. But most of the time when people call us, if it's not for another service in the village, be it utilities or an outage, whatever, they want to talk to a police officer.
Yeah.
So
I think from my perspective, let's pause, let's check in to see, because we could talk about this for
Sure.
a long time.
Yeah.
Really, the point here is to sort of check in to see, is this something that people think is worth looking into? I'm most interested in what council thinks, just for the purpose of, from a legislating standpoint. I'm interested in what, I wanted to use the chief and village manager as like sort of checks as well, just to kind of get a sense of, do you see the value in continuing a conversation on this? So if it's okay, I'd like to just give it a shot to go through everybody, do a quick straw poll. Do you think we should keep talking about this or not?
About social work.
No, about the question about the size of the department.
Oh,
So the
oh.
piece around the officer and the social worker, that's sort of baked into the question of the size in terms of whether or not there would be some flexibility. The expansion of social worker roles is its own specific topic as well. So the idea here, so the question folks are responding to is yes, no. I guess if somebody wants to say maybe, you're welcome to, but it would be really helpful if you'd say yes or no. This isn't saying we're going to do this thing. It's saying, so the question on the table here would be, do you think that we should continue to have some conversation or do some work to explore the size of the department of here in Yellow Springs?
Yeah,
That's the
I'm a
question.
yes.
Okay. And I don't know if folks want to just call out, go for it, or maybe we can go around.
We're not talking about today. We're talking.
Yeah,
about
yeah, exactly.
afterwards.
So we'll go to Mary Ann's right, if that's okay. So
Okay.
Carmen, what do you think?
Discussion, yes.
Kevin?
Gosh, you got me off the maybe. What I will say is, yes, there's a lot of information perhaps coming out of Dayton for what they're doing, but I would submit that Dayton is catching up to Yellow Springs in that regard. You know, not us trying to follow what Dayton is doing. They're actually following us. That being said, I'm comfortable moving away from this topic today, but it can be an ongoing topic in other venues.
I'm going to take that as a really long yes. Is that okay?
All right.
Okay. All right. Brian, what do you think?
So I'm gonna say yes, but my qualification is, I think about it more as structure / composition. And to me, this is. Although you know they can still hear me.
Is that the? Okay.
Oh, did you wave the bag? Oh, okay. Yeah, so structure / composition, and I think in my mind, that is like the central topic. I mean, you know, again, like I think we're, you know, discovering other things, but that's what we've been talking about since I've been on council. You know, we always kind of come back around to this. So anyway, so less about size, more about, I guess, just, yeah, what all makes sense based on the needs.
Great. Thank you. I'm a yes. And so then, and Josue and Chief, if you don't, it's like, basically this is just me trying to get a temperature check of, are you game to keep talking about it? Or is this something you're like, no, I really don't want, I really don't think we should work on this. So just, if you don't want to answer, you don't have to, but
I'll answer. I'll jump in, and it'll be a long yes. And I think I had to explain my yes. I feel that we've done a lot of work over the last 3 years, certainly over the last 3 years and much longer, on right sizing the department, finding the right functional activities, and while containing costs. So we've expanded service while containing costs. So I think that in some regard, we can never have enough conversations about the value that our police department delivers for our community. We want very high touch sensitivity service delivery model, and we are delivering on that. The year that I arrived in 2019, we had two Bobs from out of state do a thorough review of our police department operations and highlighted what's the aspirational goal. And I think there were some positive things that came out of that study, and Paige has definitely taken the department to the next level from where Brian Carlson left it. So I think in short response, or to short my response, there's a lot of great things that we do that I think that we haven't been good at telling the story and getting it out there. And I liked some of that way. Like, we don't need to talk about Doug jumping into the Glens with full weapon gear to save a life. Those things happen. That's the great department that we have. So I think we certainly strive to deliver on council's vision and mission for our community and meeting the needs of our community.
Cool. Chief, any thoughts? Yeah.
I'm happy to always continue fielding questions and inquiries. So
Cool. Okay. So we're going to move to dispatch contract. So that one, like I said, took a little longer. I think that's okay. I'm hoping maybe this one will be shorter. Just an idea.
I think it will
Just
be.
throw it out there, maybe a little shorter. I think in part because I feel like a bunch of this information was really thoughtfully shared as part of the budget discussion, and I think everybody here has seen it. So yeah. So the basic question on the table with the dispatch, I think this has been brought up in many different ways at many different times, is the idea that dispatch is so expensive and we could save a ton of money by looking somewhere else. And as you have most recently shared, it's not maybe quite so simple, but there's a question on the table of, is this something that we could look into? And I believe it was at council or at the budget meeting, you'd shared that you reach out to the county.
Right.
So anyway, I don't know if you wanted to make any initial remarks.
I do actually, because I think that I can keep this topic brief. So I got all the information back from county, and as I suspected, it is probably a greater cost than you anticipate as a body that it is. So I have some slides. I can zip through those real quick unless you want to do a straw poll, because I think it will probably eliminate the topic. I do want to make one comment. Okay. And this is the one thing I know goals is for the end, but I want to make this my goal for right now. I want to share this information with you guys. And then what I want is, obviously, we're always assessing what's better, what the needs of the village are, how we can cut costs. But I think we forget about the impact that having those discussions so publicly can have on a very important part of my team. And every year this comes up. I want to get rid of dispatch. And the fact that those people down there, what's the first thing they think? What would you guys think if every year in October you heard, well, we might get rid of you guys. So I want to present these numbers to you, and then I'm going to ask that we don't discuss this again for the sake of my team. I understand you guys are going to do what you're going to do, but I appreciate those people and the work that they do. And I know you guys do too. And what we're trying to do here is accomplish something that's cost saving and good for the village. But the numbers I'm going to present to you are going to show not even close. That's a perception that is not a reality. So I'm begging you, please, for the sake of the morale of my team, let's end this.
Okay, so I'll just say that if you have the information now, so this is one of these tricky spots where there's never been any information presented before this moment. So for people watching on TV, it's like, yeah, listen, I think we appreciate, I'll speak for myself, I appreciate the complexity of talking about these things when there are jobs and people involved. And also, we have to talk about this stuff. We're talking about this with the budget right now. We have all kinds of decisions that we're making. So why don't you go ahead and share the information, and then we can do a check-in. If everybody's like, well, that is obviously it and we're done, then we'll know right now. And if not, then we'll talk about it some more.
Sure. So this, population by size. So this is the estimated cost for Greene County Dispatch. You'll notice it says estimate, not quote. And the reason for that is because they're currently in contract negotiations. And what that means is they can't give us an actual quote until those contract negotiations are complete. Meaning I was given a disclaimer with this estimate that this won't even be right. It could be, and most likely would be greater. So a dedicated desk, meaning the same of what you have now, but over at Greene County, next year will cost $604,147. If we shared a desk with 4 other agencies, which would be a viable option, a lot of smaller agencies do that, it would cost us $310,488,000. I'm just curious. Does any one person have a guess of what we spend currently?
250.
A little more than that, Brian, but very close. 303,398, and I estimated $20,000 in overtime costs. We never spend $20,000 in overtime costs. So that estimation was extremely liberal, just to show that $303,398 is what we currently spend, with an extreme overestimate of overtime. So that's a $7,100 increase to go to Greene County right now. If we go with the proposed changes that I made for 2023, we bring that number down to $276,687. So in summary, 303, 398, status quo. That's what we'd spend next year if we had dispatch.
So
Good.
just, is there anybody, I mean, those are pretty obvious numbers. Is there anybody that had, so many of you have participated in conversations about dispatch previously. This is honestly the most information I've had, certainly in this specificity, plus the stuff that you presented part of the budget. Are there any other options that have ever been discussed? Meaning, like, is there someone else who can do this besides the county? Or when there's been discussion before about that it could be cheaper, is there anything that anybody's seen that would make it so that this wouldn't be seen as complete information?
There would be some legal challenges considering anybody outside of county dispatch because of how law enforcement and medic resources are dispatched. As it is right now, county dispatch has access to all the emergency resources that are on the field. Even the fire department are up on a master screen. So if there's an emergency, they can deploy resources as needed and coordinate services. So there wouldn't be a comparable entity that has that ability. There have been conversations with the administrators in the county, primarily Fairborn, Xenia, about creating joint districts for those municipalities. But the only reason that's existed is because this contract negotiations has been going on for a while. So there were some frustrations that had different municipalities thinking, well, what if several of us band together and create a 24-hour dispatch center for multiple municipalities. So that's the only other possibility. One thing that is not included on here would be, as Paige mentioned, and you mentioned, Gavin, that dispatch is sort of the dispatch for the entire village, including power outages, water breaks, and all those other things. I ran some estimates for what it will cost just to have a basic after-hour services for water breaks or power outages, and we'll be looking at $24,000 on an annual basis.
Okay.
So that will be something that would need to be tacked on to these services. Now we will lose a lot of things by outsourcing those things. And I just want to make a point about what Brian said about the 250. That was the estimate last year when we had this conversation, and that is the left-hand column up there on personnel costs. So if you look at it, that's 257. And then there's the contractual services, and Paige has calculated these overtime. So the numbers have been consistent around where the expense is.
Okay.
And just two last points I'd like to make. Also, currently looking into some funding opportunities for dispatch. We are currently just shy of qualifying for some of the funding that exists at the state level. There would be a cost to getting us to a place where we qualified for said funding. But if we can weigh that at some point in time, what should we have to spend and what do we have to gain? I'd like to have that conversation because I think long-term it could save us money because we could be more self-sufficient and sustained through that state funding. And that's probably the last piece I have.
Yeah. So I think that this deserves some more exploration, not because I would advise to get rid of dispatch. Quite the opposite, really. Because I think that there are things that people expect and that happen in Yellow Springs. You were just mentioning some of them that really wouldn't be possible through a county, using the county-wide. And I think that that's important for us as council to understand the kind of calls that come in. Anything from like, when's the farmer's market, or when's the football game, or those kind of calls. Maybe there are other places to funnel them. I don't know. But I think that sort of unpacking this service so that everyone understands what the service provides is a reason to keep talking about it. Also, my memory is that we haven't talked about going to the county for several years. I mean, I remember, I don't know, it feels like about 5 years or so when it was actually explored. And at that point, it seemed like it would be cheaper to go to the county, but it was clear that people wanted our own dispatch. So we didn't make that decision. So
I think there
That-
was a former council member who brought it up 2 years in a row.
mm,
So I'm guessing that's
okay.
part of where that came from. And I'll say I've been very clear about my support for local dispatch. I've never wavered on that. But I will say, and Gavin kind of referenced this kind of clarity of data is something that we don't often get that would help address some of these issues and, be a little bit more clear about them. So those past 2 years when it was brought up, I never heard these numbers referenced, so I think that's an important thing about, we can minimize those discussions if we have more clarity around the reality.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, and I will agree with Brian's assessment. I mean, there's been at the very least anecdotal conversations, but I've never seen numbers. So I appreciate that input.
Right. So I'll go ahead and start doing the round, if that's okay. So I'm going to be a no with the caveat of what Marianne said, which is that no doesn't mean that we shouldn't gather some more information and share it out about the value of dispatch. So I'm not saying but to the question on the table, which is, should we look into a dispatch contract further? I'm a no on that. And I guess I just want to make sure we're all clear. The reason I'm doing the straw poll is honestly, so I can figure out where to spend my time. I hope it also is valuable to the rest of you. If 4 of us say that we don't think we should move forward with something and somebody like Kevin's like, no, we have to continue that kind of, obviously you're welcome to bring it up or figure out places to work on it. It's just, so anyway, just to be clear, this doesn't mean we'll never talk about this again. It just, this is just trying to get a sample of where we're at. So I'm a no on this one, and we'll go, how about we go the other way? We'll go this way. Brian, what about you?
Okay, so I'm a no. And my caveat is I like the day in the life thing that I think you mentioned. And so that kind of gets at what Marianne was saying, just sort of developing more understanding, and education is a great thing.
Cool. Kevin?
No, with the same caveats.
All righty, Carmen?
Hard no.
Marianne?
With the no with the caveat.
Okay. Josue or Paige, anything to add? Good. Okay. All right.
Florence.
Okay. So next up, we'll move on to talking about the expansion of social worker role. So the topic of conversation here is, I think there has been discussion, is the idea of could we use more social workers? Would more social workers have benefit? And I think I've heard it in sort of for its own sake, meaning like same exact number of police officers and more social workers. And then it's come up in the context of the sort of size of the department thing, as though we could have less police officers and more social workers. So we're sort of opening up a conversation about would more social workers be something that we might want to look at when we think about what the size, I think, as Brian put it, like sort of the composition of the department might look like. So Paige, did you want to start with comments on this one?
No, I think I'll just respond in this circumstance.
Okay, sounds good. So yeah, open it up for questions or thoughts that folks have on the social worker expansion idea.
Well, I mean, in general, more good stuff, and Florence is good. More good stuff is better. Is there a problem that we're wanting to solve? Are we finding out when we're out on calls that we need social service support more often than we have available? Or what is today's reality?
Yeah, so I'll respond to that. I think if I had to do Florence's job, I think I'm stressed now. There's no way. She is inundated with need from community members, be it a call for resources, be it a call for someone to talk to, a visit, a meeting, a training. She is asked by everyone every day for everything. And so at the bare minimum, some assistance for Florence would be more more than justified.
And I appreciate that, Chief Burge. Now, even with the fact that I know that Florence is superhuman, because of her motivation, I can support that. You know, the fact that, as I start off, that more is better, and if we can certainly identify, you know, where more services, whether it's another person or not, or more resources, would be beneficial. You know, I would support broadening that effort.
And we are working on that. You know, I don't want to put Florence on the spot to talk about something that's not even quite complete, but it is in the works to get some assistance, and not just assistance, but a pipeline for the position in itself. And that's something that we will have funding for it to come in. That won't be something that we will be funding here. So I'll spare you the details because I don't really have them at this time, but that is in the works for 2023.
So one of the things I want to throw out, because I'm a proponent for, you know, volunteers, there are social worker students who need practicums at Cedarville, especially. They need that experience. And also Wright State has their social work school is regionally known, and same thing with Cedarville. It's a regionally known program. And they have students that have to have practicums. And it would be a no cost thing.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that's an
That's something-
excellent idea, Carmen.
Awesome.
This was brought up before because I am a grad of Cedarville.
Oh,
But anyway, because it's required that the students do have this, but when it was brought up with the prior chief and we approached the village manager and I guess council, is that the insurance, whatever that meant, was the stickler for whatever we wanted to do, that they weren't covered under insurance. So we're going at it at a different angle. So I've been with the coalitions that we deal with, our Mental Health and Recovery Board, and with NAMI, which is the mental health. We have, sorry about that. We have been assigned for Greene, Clark, and Preble County, no, Madison, Clark, Greene, Madison counties, a part-time case manager who has been working with me to provide services for our homeless population and those who are unhoused. So that is in the work, is currently happening. And those are state funds. What Chief was talking about is another entity, which is our community foundation, along with Homeful, which provides housing for those who are about to be unhoused. They are working on a case manager position that would have service times here in Yellow Springs to help with that case management. So that's what we're working on. Other entities that already have the funds and the capacity to help us with what needs to happen.
Great. So I'm gonna make a suggestion that we move to straw polling because I think I have a pretty good sense of where we're gonna go on this one. If anybody got any burning questions before we do that? Okay, because it seems like this is something there's interest in, so, you know, it's that my sense is that we're gonna talk more about it. So how about, do we mind, Brian, we'll go this way. You mind starting out?
So yes, I'm interested in discussing it more. I will say, it never came to council around the insurance piece and whatnot. And, you know, I guess I challenge if we can, you know, take on interns, you know, with the, you know, foundation fellows. I don't know. I'm not sure why, you know, we wouldn't be able to do it in this case. And I guess I wonder if, you know, schools have similar things, you know, with teachers getting their experience. So yeah, I really want to understand that more.
Thanks. Kevin?
Yes, and just a plug for Inclusive Resilient Yellow Springs, you know, that group along with Community Foundation has begun the work that Florence referred to in the Homeful connection. So yes, yes, and yes.
Great. Carmen?
yes. And also exploring the insurance piece. interested in finding out more about that.
Great. Marion?
Yes, and I think it falls into what Brian said of not just going by the status quo, but looking transformationally. So it's really like looking at the whole department. That's how I see it.
Great. And I'm a yes also. Chief or Josue, anything to add?
Nope, I'm good.
Yeah, I'll making commentary. So on the previous research on the dispatch position, I would have came in the tail end of that conversation. I would have came in on the tail end of that conversation. There certainly would be some challenges around lead certification and Paige can speak to state requirement on who handles dispatch services. But I also want to highlight that we have been very supportive of the Community Foundation's effort to have coordinated 211 call center type functions. Some of the most recent effort around this started after they issue a grant for somebody to coordinate services in the village. And so this has been a way to revamp that effort to coordinate social services and other resource programming within the village. So that's my recollection of it. So
Cool. Okay, we're gonna move on to the next one if that's okay. So the idea of merging police and fire departments. This one might win the award for being the biggest idea and the longest term, most complex idea. So I hope that we can sort of acknowledge that would require lots of conversation, discussion. And just the question here on the table is just, is this something that's, even of interest to worth looking into? I don't know. Did you want to start with any comments?
I have a lot. I was able to do quite a bit of research. This concept not only excites me, it excites my team. I'm not quite sure how Colin's team. So first of all, hats off to Colin for showing up and sitting through everything that wasn't about him to get to the final stretch here. So that's why I'm Chief Altman. I wanted to hear his opinion. Obviously, I don't know anything about fire and EMS, so his expertise will be critical. But I have a ton of information if everyone's interested in hearing that information. So
Cool. Could you, I guess my inclination is I want to hear all the information, but I want to hear it in like its full form, not like in a rush.
Sure.
So to me, it's like, I'm kind of interested since you're here. Do you have any initial reactions? Like when you hear that the, village council people are just even bringing this up as a topic, how do you, if you don't mind?
In the fire service, fire and emergency medical service, consolidation of fire and police is seen as a no winner. There's 38,000 fire and EMS departments in the United States, and there's 140 combination fire departments, combination public safety departments. It really started in the 70s and never took off. It's a dream of a lot of city managers to consolidate services. There are some models in which rural sheriff's departments train deputies as EMTs because they are first responders and have to wait 40 minutes for an ambulance. In a suburban, rural-ish area like ours, I don't know how much value there would be, plus the extreme cost that comes with training my guys as police officers and training the police officers as firefighters and most likely paramedics, because we want to go for the highest level of service. The other big issue for us on the fire side, and this is no offense to our law enforcement brothers and sisters, but there are two different mindsets that come with being a firefighter, paramedic, and being a police officer. And even with the way our police department is, and I can tell you for 30 years here, we have an amazing police department, and especially now, and I echo everything, all the compliments. And we deal with the sheriff on a regular basis and OSP. ODNR, they're kind of the nicest people on the face of the planet, but when you're in the woods all day, I guess. But it's a really different mindset, whereas a police officer is trained to be more assertive and at times aggressive. We don't necessarily want that skill set, especially with patient care. I mean, as Mary Ann points out, fire is very little what we do, very little. But the vast majority is in the back of an ambulance talking to people, excuse me. And some people unfortunately don't want to deal with police officers. So it does make it our perception is it more difficult to do our job. Are there shared services we can do? Certainly. I think we missed an opportunity with our construction of our building to have done a combined facility to have police and fire. We visited several of those facilities when we were doing our construction pre-construction work. And there were some great places where there were shared lockers and shared kitchen spaces. And we benefit, I think, that we have a very close working relationship with all the officers, and we have for eons. But now especially, but I think that could be closer had we had that. But there are certainly areas in terms of training. And we've done some joint purchases and that kind of stuff. But we don't typically see, fire service don't typically see the combination as something that's going to be a winning thing. Now, training officers as first responders is something that I think is a wonderful idea, even EMTs, but that gets pricey. Right now, the officers in town are great for us on ambulance calls, with our lower staffing that we've had, having sometimes the third person in our crew is a police officer who knows how to get our ambulance caught and can do CPR and all those kind of things. I think there's a lot of areas that we can strengthen our relationship in and work closer together. Our guys doing more traffic control, assisting at scenes that, a lot of times we finish what we're doing and then we just leave. We're like, see ya, good luck. And I don't know if we would do that for the troopers, no offense, troopers, but we're like a family here.
Yeah.
So, we dinner together, those kind of things sometimes. And I think more things that we can do like that together would be helpful. I don't know if combining and then looking also at the costs of, you look at a starting salary of a guy or gal in Oakwood, it's a lot of money because they're a public safety department and they're starting in, I think, the 70s or more, apparently. So, which I don't think anyone would complain about, but you're also doing 3 different jobs. So it's, I think a lot, it sounds good until you really dive into it, at least on the fire EMS side. Police side may be different because it'll give them something else.
I just want to drive an ambulance. Can I just drive an ambulance?
can do that
All right.
Hey, if I can drive your cruiser, you can just drive.
Now, wait a minute, we didn't.
Thank you. Thank you. Did you want to make any sort of initial sort of top line comments?
Yeah, I mean, I'm super glad that I first of all, right back at you. We do have a great working relationship, and despite us not sharing facilities, my guys spend a lot of time over there. His guys will call, hey, we're having such and such for dinner. I mean, we have a great working relationship. So that's why I think when the topic came up, I was really excited because I knew we had both had great teams that could potentially, but everything Colin said, you'll see when I highlight in detail, he's 100% right. He's hitting the obstacles on the head, nail on the head there. But there's some good in there, but he's probably right. From a fire perspective, there is probably more good for police than fire. So, but still, nonetheless, I have the information if you'd like to hear it, and we'll kind of go there.
A question.
Yeah.
Do we have an officer? I remember, I think that we have an officer that at least one officer that is an EMT. Is that right? Or a paramedic? We have an officer that's trained or
Yes.
was?
Yes.
Okay, so we do have at least,
Officer Dave Meister. I'll go ahead and say his name.
okay. Okay, so Officer Meister is an EMT, is that right? Or is
Yeah.
he?
I don't want to speak in.
Yeah, Dave
guy's
is a
training.
firefighter and EMT.
Okay. Yeah. So one's already down.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to recommend in terms of sharing of the information is this is a potential topic for our joint meeting
Okay.
on December 7th.
Sure.
So that's kind of where we may talk about this further. And so, Judy's trying to collect whatever materials. It'd be nice to see those in that packet. And then, I'm guessing you'll be at that meeting in case there are any questions. But, well, maybe, no, but I also, I like the idea of hearing coordination, shared services, and it sounds like if we can get more people trained EMT and that sort of thing, that could certainly not hurt, but.
Absolutely.
So again, acknowledging this is a much bigger topic. So the question on the table is about, is there any, is it worth spending some more time talking about, merging? And I guess I'm just going to say, when we're saying, if you answer yes here, that would include at the most small level of finding some shared service opportunities to a massive restructuring and whatever. So just we've got notes here. I think I get where folks are at, but just to do a quick pause and check. Kevin, I think you're the next one up in the round here. Do you mind, where are you at on yes or no on spending some more time on this?
Yes, but doing it in the trifecta meeting or the three taxing agencies, whenever we get there.
Cool. Carmen?
Kevin, same, but and Brian.
Yep.
When we have the
Yeah, we got.
trifecta.
Kevin keeps on driving. Like he wants that moniker.
Give me another one. I'll take it.
Marianne?
Right.
Same. One reason why I thought, aside from whether it would save money or not, I don't know about that. But one reason I thought it might be attractive would be that we have a small department, police department, don't have a lot of opportunity for people moving up. And it occurred to me that maybe having that bigger skill set would be attractive to people. So that was a prime reason why I thought maybe this would be something that at least we should.
Was that sort of just not to get in the weeds, but was that sort of the path that Officer Meister took? Was he solely firefighter EMT and then came to police, or?
I don't know the answer to that actually, where he
Dave,
started. I
my
think he had interest in police
remembrance-
first, right?
Yeah, Dave came in as a police officer. He moved to the community. He had been an officer of some sort
Right.
in out west. And then he had always, I think, had always wanted to be a firefighter EMT. So he came to us as a volunteer, went through the police academy at Clark State to get his Ohio certification, and then here we are.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I'm a yes, and I agree with other comments are made. I'll say like this, the idea about like the mindset stuff that you mentioned is actually one of the reasons I'm really interested in it. Is the idea of of how do we have that mindset meld? How do we have that kind of goodwill across the board? So anyway, Brian,
Yeah, I think you got mine. So joint meeting.
great. Josue or Chief, anything to add?
I'll say that Colin is right, that city managers love this concept for a variety of reasons. One, consolidation of service, back office operations. There's also a better coordinated personnel policy management. Currently in the national landscape, there's fire unions with different perks and different benefits that unions are able to negotiate. Likewise, for law enforcement, you're seeing it now at the state level, the different pension systems that exist for the different groups. So combined service just helps consolidate a lot of those different management assets and policies and benefits. So there are a lot of things from an administrative perspective that are attractive about it. But I have to agree with Colin that there is a mindset piece there too. But I see, when Paige and I discussed it, and she gave me her debrief from her meeting with Chief at Oakwood. It seems that there's a big hump to get over, but if that big hump is able to be overcome, there's greatness. So the grass may be greener on the other side of that hump, but it is difficult to get there. But the fact that there's only 140 combined districts in the country is an example of that difficult.
Cool. Okay. I think we're doing pretty well here. So we have two more topics. I'm going to skip the weapons one just for a second, because I hope this other one is relatively straightforward. So the question of sending everything we can to Mayor's Court. So I wondered if you could talk about that page for just a second, and then if we have any sort of burning comments, but maybe we'll do this one hopefully a little more quickly, spend maybe a few more minutes on the weapons piece, and then move to close out and try to stick pretty much on time.
Sure. So in summary, the answer is yes. But also what I'd like to add is I recently met with the mayor regarding, so we've made that transition now, right? Where we're sending everything to mayor's court that can be sent to mayor's court. So now what she does see is very limited. So we had this really good conversation recently about, hey, what I'm getting is mostly waiverable stuff because it's mostly minor misdemeanors. And when it's not a minor misdemeanor, sometimes it's still waiverable. And so we're taking that process to the next level. So as far as this question is concerned, the answer is yes. And we're trying to even elevate our involvement in mayor's court even more. So one of the, just to give a little, just more detail about what that means is one of the things that she was interested in seeing is the whole reason for a mayor's court is to have that restorative justice piece, right? And when the ones who are going to mayor's court are all waiverable offenses, it's almost like she feels, well, I'm so excited to do this restorative justice piece, but then everyone just pays their fines and never comes to court. So we've had some really good discussion about what we can do, like what do we have to make waiverable, what doesn't have to be, when do situations call for the need to say, you got to show up and talk to the mayor, you know, those kind of things. So we're taking it to the next level. I think we're not only, we've already, boom, we nailed it with what should go to mayor's court goes. So now let's take it a step further. And to piggyback off of that, I recently met with the new coordinator for village mediation, who is outstanding. Chef Kiss, Diane, she's outstanding. We are going to reevaluate the way that we approach mediation and start including that as a prong in our, what I'm affectionately referring to, I hope it catches on, as progressive enforcement. You guys have heard of progressive discipline in the workplace. I'm referring to it as progressive enforcement, where we're like, hey, we warned you. Now we're going to, you know, we mentored you and coached you. Now we're going to give you a written warning. And now it's going to be a citation to mayor's court. And then after all that fails, maybe it goes to Xenia Municipal. So hopefully that there's no questions about that process. I think we're doing a pretty good job of that. So.
Can you define waiverable? So.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
understand it.
Waiverable means that they do not have to appear in court. It means that they can just simply pay their fine and accept that they got caught going 70 and the 25 and they're done with it. So actually they would probably come to court for 70 and a 25. So
Yeah.
not the
I
most
would
expensive.
hope.
You know what I meant.
All right. Okay. Questions or thoughts from council members? Okay. I think I'm up next. I think I'm going to be a no just because it sounds like you're on it. So that's where I'm at. Brian?
Yeah, I felt good about the progress we've made and the reports that we get. I like seeing mediation on this report. And I would just assume we would be in the loop on the progressive enforcement and sort of less
Sure.
waivable,
Yep.
what that means. So I would just want to hear more about that as it unfolds.
Sure.
Cool.
Kevin?
Which is the exact question we're
Um,
answering now.
Just, do you think we should spend more time looking into the question of whether or not we're sending things to mayor's court or how we're working with mayor's court?
No, because I'm satisfied with the work that's being done.
Carmen?
No, I mean, it's just, you're kind of delivering on my, answering my question. So, all good.
Cool. Marianne?
I would want to be informed about changes that might happen in regard to what you were saying about waiverable offenses, because at least since maybe COVID and since the police department is sort of scaling back, giving citations and things, it just seems like there's not a lot that goes to mayor's court. If there's not a lot that goes to mayor's court, is there a reason to have mayor's court? So that's something I think we should be looking, at least be able to say, yeah, there's a reason to have mayor's court because, these offenses are being heard. But if you have one offense every couple months or something, is that worth it?
Thank you. Josue or Chief, anything to add?
Mary Ann's got me thinking because, part of us tried not to keep the mayor busy by resolving things that are not, that don't need to go to court. For example, grass growing between the cracks of sidewalks. So we've tried to resolve a lot of the neighbor conflicts administratively. And so we're sensitive to that. How many the criminalization of administrative code issues. I think you've heard me most recently speak about the need to send things to mayor's court, at least zoning matters. So we're evaluating that because, we try to be low touch or, light touch, sending multiple letters to people on zoning infractions. So interesting to hear you say that because we try not to keep her busy. On purpose, not keep her busy, but not to cite people for all the infractions.
Got it.
So where's the balance?
Yeah, okay. All right, so then moving to the reduced use of weapons, vests, cameras, other equipment. So I think the basic topic, I think, has come up in a range of different ways. It's come up in the context of the cost of equipment. It's come up in the context of the need for equipment. And the sort of signals that we're sending with, I'm going to call everything equipment here for the purpose of just having one word to say. So that's the general topic. Chief, I don't know if you want to start with a few remarks on this and then we can go from there.
Sure. So one of the things that I want to open with is that willing to answer questions, willing to talk about some of the concerns that might exist. But one thing I do want to make perfectly clear is I've heard discussion around weapons and maybe taking weapons from officers, and that's a non-negotiable. So if that's something the council in the long term decides that that's something they want to move forward with, I would send a very strong message that you would likely lose your police department and never get it back. And I don't say that to be any kind of doom and gloom. I say it as a very, very strong reality. At some point, you have to decide, do I want a police department or do I want to have a department of social workers or do I want both? But if you have police officers, they will be armed and they will be able to not only protect themselves, but protect this community with the level of force that they may, hopefully never, but may combat. So with that said, I did put up some talking points, again, some information that Corporal Whipple was able to find in combination with some of my own knowledge about bullet resistant vests and body cameras, which again, also happy to field questions about those things as well, but I'll let you do your straw poll to see if this is even something folks want to chat about.
Questions, thoughts, folks have from council?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I think we know that there are countries, some European countries, where it's my understanding that officers do not necessarily carry guns, and guns kill people. That's why police officers have guns. And the more guns, I mean, I'm speaking from my personal value system. The more guns we have, the more guns kill people. And having someone armed and having an officer who is armed has a negative, it can be negative and fear producing for the general population. I would not be a part of mandating that our officers not carry a gun, but I do think that elevating the question of guns, and particularly guns, as weapons that our officers routinely carry, is worth discussing and having a conversation about that. Are there times when, well, let's say, for example, the officer that goes and spends time at the Green Educational Services, could that officer go in and without a gun for a while or have a gun someplace? Or could an officer be walking downtown without a gun? Are there times, I don't, Paige, I guess usually you have your equipment on, but I do recall Chief Carlson and I think some of the other chiefs who would be around in more, civilian dress, I guess it's called. So I think at least it's worth having a conversation.
And I'll just add to that, Marianne. Yeah, Chief Carlson was in civilian dress often, but he was often armed. I mean, he wore a sport coat. You couldn't see it, but he was.
Or an ankle.
Mhm.
Well, I'll just say, and we talked about this obviously a little bit, it's something I would like to talk about a little bit more. I mean, amongst other things, it's costly. So I'm just trying to understand to what degree do we need weapons and how many of them? The reason that we're spending money on body cameras, and the main reason we're spending money on body cameras is because of the problems with violence. And it'd be great to not have to deal with this. So I understand it may be something that is a non-starter, or there may be no changes that can be made whatsoever. But ultimately, I do think we have a problem with militarization in this country. And I think just like we've talked about around, we talked about most recently with the 2% fee about recycling, we talk about it with the climate change things. So this is an area where I just, on some basic level, like I would like to have a different energy between police, public safety, and people, not just residents, tourists, anybody. And when I see an officer with, bulletproof vests, weapons, lots of equipment, and that includes the kinds of vehicles that we drive, the kinds of equipment, beyond on a person, an individual. I think it's sending a message, and I think that we should have some, just discussion about it, see if there's any opportunity to send a different message.
Chief Burge and anyone in the room, really. There are police officers, and whatever your image or picture of a police officer is, there you go. Some communities also have, community resource volunteers that, have some authority to help go out and help do stuff, but they're just regular citizens, not armed. We've talked about volunteers of various sorts. Are there any thoughts about having, and I can't think of what anything's called, but I've known in some communities there's neighborhood watch, or that's probably a bad thing to say because of Florida, but those types of folks who aren't going around trying to shoot them up all the time.
I think you're referring to Citizens on Patrol, probably. Yeah. That's the most common name for it, I think. And those folks handle they might do a little traffic control, things like that. They might go out and maybe do some neighborhood watches. Or do you have any familiarity with, I know Beaver Creek had a program.
Yep.
So just some kind of elementary duties like that. But I think what we're talking about here is just a lot different. I just come back to the point of, if you want police officers, we will be police officers. And I will make sure, if it's within my power, that my team has everything they need tools wise to keep them safe and the community safe. So I've got some statistics here that I think are important to highlight. The safety equipment, bullet resistant vests, even guns are safety equipment. No different than an employee of public works who wears protection against electric shock, fire, falls, and trench collapses. I don't know the last time you had a guy electrically shocked, but if he was, then at least he had the gear on to be able to handle that. Just like the last time somebody got fired at here in the village of Yellow Springs, Lord Jesus, knock on wood. But at least we have the equipment to protect us from that. 76% less likely to be killed by a firearm shot to the torso when you're wearing a bulletproof vest. Studies show that 83.7% of officer deaths this year were due to firearms. And some of those shootings have occurred very close. Clark County Deputy Yates, who is actually a relation to one of our officers. Clear Creek Township Eric Ney, who did not die, fortunately, but he was shot. Dayton PD Officer Holloway, and of course, Richmond PD Officer Burton, who was killed in the line of duty by a firearm. Of course, body cameras, something we've been a proponent for a long time. Accountability and transparency, those are pillars of our vision and our community expectations. A couple things to highlight: 64% more likely to be subject to disciplinary action, officers were, when they have body-worn cameras on. Considerable degree of racial disparity in the resolution of citizen complaints. So prior to the implementation of body-worn cameras, after the implementation, dismissed cases decreased from 53% to 38%. So a lot more sustained complaints via the use of body-worn cameras.
Other questions, comments?
Well, just one other thing, because I heard kind of maybe a general, talking about this more might happen. At one point, there was discussion around variety in uniforms. And so I'd like to pick that up again. And so I don't feel like that's really covered here, but is there an opportunity for a summer uniform that could sometimes be worn and just kind of like to sort of balance out the militarized look or whatever. So
Board shorts, for sure.
yeah.
I think a lot of my guys want to wear shorts, so careful what you ask for.
Hey.
There's some pale legs coming out this summer, so.
Uh-oh.
We'll wear our shades. We'll be fine.
All right, we'll do a round here if that's okay. I think Marianne, you're up next to go around. So what's your thought?
Yes.
Okay, Carmen,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Ryan?
Yep, with the focus that I mentioned. Yeah.
Cool. And I'm a yes also. So Paige, I think I feel like you made yourself clear. Josue, anything you want to add? Okay. Okay, this
Statement.
yes, sure.
I read this. We keep saying reduce use of weapons. Now, I don't know how often we have to use a weapon is used by our police department, but I think when we come to the subject of that, we should use neutral words and not accusatory words. I heard you say that in the past, Gavin. So it sounds like there are weapons been used and we want to reduce that. So I just wanted to make that because it stuck out to me in this discussion.
Okay, yeah. So I think that's it for these questions. There may be more that we've missed. I've taken a bunch of notes of sort of other potential topics or follow-up things to do. So unless there's anything that's like burning that's left that you want to say before we close, I want to move to doing a quick round of something you learned and something you're left wondering. And if you can keep that to a sentence, and ideally not like several commas, semicolons, and dashes. Okay. So just one thing you learned in a sentence, one thing you're left wondering. This is the children of Yellow Springs. So one thing you learn, one thing you're left wondering, and then yeah, we'll do a quick conversation about next steps, and then we'll close out. So I don't know. Does anybody want to start? And then we'll do popcorn style. So somebody go and then pass it to somebody.
I'll start because I'll be short. I start off my comment. Well, I can't do one sentence. Sorry. I appreciate all the information. Great opportunity to share thoughts. My mind has shifted a little bit, but closer to being positive. I mean, I'm 112% in support of the police department. And so like Paige, I'd like for them to be equipped to be as successful and safe as possible. And I'll pass on to Brian.
Okay. So wondering is this whole thing about using student social workers, because I guess I don't buy it. So it just doesn't make sense to me. And again, never came to council. And learned. I think I learned that there seems to be some openness to, well, actually, what I learned about was sort of like positives and negatives around what we could do to cross over between the fire department and police department, because that has come up and I've been curious about it. So.
Cool. You want to pass it to somebody?
Oh, yes, Carmen.
Okay. So exploring what that would look like, because students are required to do practicums, and what that would look like. Other municipalities do it. It's a thing. It wouldn't be something that Yellow Springs would just do. You know, there are other municipalities that already do it. What that could potentially look like, especially for Florence, to have people that could call ODJFS or call Children's Services or call CAP to get somebody's, utility help, or and although there are a lot of other agencies here, there's a lot of state availability. There's a lot of state agency availability. The thing that I kind of learned or hadn't really considered was the use of firearms for police, call them tools, because I have a different relationship. That's something that I haven't even really considered. So I'm going to have to think about how I how I really feel about it. And I'm just gonna have to think about it more. Who? Marianne. There you go.
I was impressed with what Florence's work, like burdens are. So, and the need, clearly the need that's there. And I was very interested in what you said about the different I'll just
Mindset.
use the word persona. That might not be the right word, between an EMT, firefighter and police officer, and how your folks maybe don't want to take on the sort of aggression maybe. And I guess that was you that said, well, that might be a reason to sort of think about that more. But that's interesting to me.
I'll pass it to somebody.
Yeah, I guess. it would
Pass
be
to
you.
me. Okay, all right. I learned that the dispatch is not going to be save us any money. And I'm left wondering whether we're going to need to pursue a levy. Because I'm wondering how we're going to pay for all of the things after next year. As I understand it, we have a structural problem. Next year, we're going to need to figure out how to have money. And I'll pass it to Chief Burge.
Oh, I didn't know I was participating.
Everybody
Crap.
should participate in this.
Goodness.
It's popcorn.
I learned that apparently firefighters don't like police officers. No. No, not at all. Well, I guess I learned a little bit about where everyone's coming from. I mean, these things are really nice to hear everyone's perspectives. I think we get such short interactions with one another that if I took nothing from this, it's where everyone's mind's at. And I think the good news is we're all here for the village. So trying to do its best. I am left wondering, I guess, yeah, a little bit about what you said, Brian. I'd like to see and explore that internship possibility. I mean, I think that could open a lot of doors for us from a resource standpoint for community outreach. So, yeah, and that's it. I will pass it to Josue.
Thank you. I feel that what I've learned is that we're closer in our thinking and in our aspirations for delivery services than we thought we might have been prior to this meeting. So I think there was a lot more commonalities or things that we understand that why they're being done and how they're being done now than we did before this meeting.
Pass it to somebody.
Chief. Well, you're here.
You're here. What do you think?
What they teach us in fire is true, that police officers all want to be firefighters.
Yeah,
Clearly, that's true. And I'm fascinated by the idea of the social worker students. I mean, we can insure high school students with workers' comp and liability insurance, so I can't imagine you can't insure like a master's student
Right.
working for, so that's a great idea and be wonderful. And help take some of the, I don't want to say burden, but well, maybe some of the burden off of Florence who does work her self. Yeah, so anyway, who's left? Florence. Oh, Florence. No.
Your children out there.
I just want to say that I did learn the mindset of a firefighter EMT is different than that of a police. But I knew that the services are different. They're more care oriented and these are safety oriented. So I did know that, but I'm glad you brought that up. And the thing about the we keep using the word social worker, and I want to make it clear that we understand that we don't have a social worker, we have a social services worker because the job description does not require it. But if we bring in students that have to be supervised, they do have to be supervised by a licensed social worker or someone master in social work with a supervisory title. So that's one thing. And we haven't looked at Miller Fellows to do that position. And I pass it to Paul.
Boy. Well, I guess
Mike.
I suppose I learned that quite a bigger interest in quality over quantity in the department. But I think with that comes a lot of expenses, a lot of providing us with the tools so we can effectively do our jobs. Oh, absolutely, yeah. Judy, why not?
Why not?
Johnny's available, isn't he?
I learned a lot because Paige brings a tremendous amount of information to the table. And it's interesting to me that information can be provided, but perceptions are locked in. So I saw the information be provided, but the perception did not shift. So I think the conversation needs to continue, but that a lot of what needs to still happen is a degree of openness to hearing that information and considering how we feel about what's happening on a national scale and what's happening in our village are extremely different things. And how do we pull away from our thoughts about what's happening nationally and refocus them as to what actually do we have here and what do we want here? So kind of messed up the whole trajectory there if you're so Johnny.
How you doing? I think one thing that I learned is even though Paige put a lot of work into the presentation, did an awesome job. What everybody needs to understand is she did this above and beyond her normal job, her staff call offs. And she also has a team behind her that can help her grab that data. And it took to the last minute to get it put in. So that's the reason why nobody got it. The other thing that I learned is I think every one of the council members need to not just ride along, but live in a day in the life of a dispatcher or a police officer, not just for an hour, spend the whole shift with them and see what they do, see how they help out the fire department. And then when you get down there, Public Works is always available for ride-alongs and day shifts, volunteers to dig holes, and you do after an 8-hour completion class.
I can go to wastewater treatment.
You can. And just so you know, firefighters also need heroes, and they're called linemen.
Oh, see, I thought you were tossing it back to me.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. So I think we talked at the beginning, the next step is, my plan was to look over this information and then sort of suggest out what some next steps would be. Some of them I think pretty much already agreed on. Everybody's, it's pretty obvious. Next time to talk about the merger ideas at the trifecta meeting, so on and so forth. So my plan would just be to send an email out probably to Judy to send to everybody. And then we could check in about it at the next council meeting. So if there's not anything else, I think we're good to go.
Well, Gavin, I just want to say thank you for your leadership and facilitating this. It really helped move the meeting go along and get things accomplished. So it was a fruitful 2 hours. Appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you, Gavin. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Yes,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Yeah, thank you, Paige.
That was a theater.